We're here on Daf Mem Tes Omid Beis, and we're trying to understand why in the cases of Bala Nido, Bala Sota, there's no Mamzerus. More explains the following. Nida, this is on the top of Mem Tes Omid Beis, the Tafsi Ba Kedushin. We're going to prove from a pasuk that if a man marries a Nida, even though to have a relationship with her would be a violation of Isa Karis, nevertheless, there is a valid Kiddush. There is Tfisus Kiddush. Nemar, Usehi Nidasa Allah. And the word Tehi is a Lashon Havaya, Lashon of Kiddush. Afilu B'Shas Nidasa, Tafsi Be Kiddushin. And if a man violates this, the Vlad is not a Mamzer because Mamzeris is generated by Tfisus Kiddush. Now we have the case of Bala Sota Nami. The Vlad is not a mamzer. Even according to Rabbi Akiva holds there is mamzeres from Chayvei Lavin, but Sota is different. But Tafsi Ber Kiddush. In other words, even after she had this nus and she became a Sota, there's no afkar to undermine and disqualify the Kiddushin Rishonim, the original Kiddushin. So you see that there is Tfis Kiddushin with a Sota. Hence, there's no Mamzerus. Now, once the Gemara says that it all depends on Tfis Kiddushin, why did the Gemara need this pasuk? After all, in the case of Sota Lopaku Kiddushin Rishonim, in the case of Nida, also Lopaku Kiddushin Rishonim. So why do you have to say because it's Tfis Kiddushin if a man marries a Nida? Just talk about the fact that if a man is already married and she became a Nida, it's not Mafkir the Kiddushin like in the case of Sota. Tosus Kash. Tanya Nami Hochi, Hakol Modu Mibala Nida, Ala Sota, now, in the cases of Sota and Nida, we already explained that there's Tfisus Kiddush and therefore there is no Mamzeris. Now we add in this price of the Isra of Shomeres Yavam, where the Torah says Lotia Eish Sameis Achutza Leish Zar, and that's a violation of a lav of Shomeres Yavam L'Shuk, Yavam L'Shuk. And that doesn't generate mamzeros. Why not? Because the Torah says losia, and losia is mashma havaya, meaning ishus, and kedushin tosim be yevamot. Lashuk. You're not allowed to be makadisher, but if you did, the diavad post facto, the kedushin atofes, and therefore there's no mamzeros. Now notice that there's a discrepancy here between Abaye, who mentioned only the cases of Nida and Sota, as opposed to the Brisa, which added Shomeres Yavam. So the Gemara now wants to address the question why Abaye didn't mention Shomeres Yavam. Abaye, Shomeres Yavam, Misafkala, we're not sure exactly how to interpret the pasuk. It says, Losia Eish Sameis Achutza Lishzar. Rav Shmuel. Later on in Tzavi Beis, Rav interprets the pasuk Losia that Ein Kiddushin Tosma for someone other than the Yavam, of course, and therefore she would not need a get if somebody would be Mekadesh a Shomeres Yavam. So we see that Ein Kiddushin Tosma, and therefore the Vlad should be a Mamzer. And Abaye's worried about this sheet of Rav. Although, if we interpret like Shmuel, who requires a get, and he thinks that maybe Kedushin are Tovsim, therefore there would be no Mamzeris. So Abaye was vacillating back and forth about this, and therefore he didn't mention the case of Baal Shomeres Yavam as a case of Ein Avlad Mamzer, because it could very well be that there's no Tfis Kiddushin in the case of Yavam L'Shuk, and the Ish Zar could not effectuate Kiddushin with the Yavam L'Shuk, and therefore there would be Mamzeris. The Mishnah says, Rav Shimon ben Azai, he found the Megillas Yuchsa that Ish Ploni is a mamzer sheba al iser ashes Ish Tni. The Gemara brings more from that Megillus Yuchsin. Shimon ben Azio Mimatsasi Megillus Yuchsin Yushalayim because we Ploni mamzer ashes each bit. And furthermore, and again, we derive from that Megillus Yuchsin the conclusion, the support for Yeshua that there's no Mamzeres except for Chiv Misa. Because of Ba, it says further in the Megillus Yuchsin, Mishnas, meaning the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. And the Mishnah, the teachings, and the views of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov are Kav v'Noki. Kav is a small midah, and Naki means they took out all the psolas and they refined it. And whenever we mention the Shita of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, we paskin like Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. And that's what we found in the Megillus Yuchsin. Furthermore, the Ode, Chosev, but says further in the Megillus Yuchsin, Menashe harages Yishayo, that King Menashe was the one who put Yishayo Hanavi to death. Why did Menashe kill Yishayo Hanavi Amarava? Meidan Daine, the king Menashe, judged Yishayo based on some of the various prophecies of Yishayo. And it would seem that these nevuos are against the mikra and v'katle, and therefore he put him to death. Amalei, Menashe says to Yeshayo, Moshe Rabba Omar, Kilo Yerani Odom V'chai, man is not capable of seeing the Almighty. No Bria could see the Almighty. V'ata Amarta, you said, Va'era es Hashem Yoshev al Kisei Ram V'nisa. Another contradiction. Moshe Rabba Omar, Mi Kalokei Hashem, Kashem Elokeinu, B'chol Kareinu Ola, Ela, which implies that Hashem is always to be found as long as we call out to him. V'yad Amar Dirchu Hashem B'himot'o, implying that you can only find Hashem during certain periods of time. Another contradiction. Moshe Rabba Omar, Es Mispar Yomecha Amalek, that Mashlim es Yimei Adam, God has a kitzvah, how long a person will live, and not longer. God will not add to that. V'ata, you Yeshayo Amarta, you told Chizkiyahu Melech, V'osafti al Yomecha Chamesh Shana, that God added 15 years to the life of Chizkiyahu Melech, even though the original kitzvah, he didn't have those 15. We see that Mosifin al Shnosa Adam Sheniktevu Lo. And again, here's another contradiction between what Moshe Rabbeinu taught us, Mispar Yomecha Amale, and what Yeshaya taught of Hosafti al Yomecha Chamesh Shana. In his own self-defense, Amar Yeshayo, Yodana Bey, I know about Menashe, whatever I'll tell him to respond and to interpret the Mikros so that there's no contradiction, he's not going to accept it. He's going to kill me in any event. And therefore, if I'll give him an answer to his questions, Ishavye Maz. Mason. I will make him into a mason. In other words, right now he thinks he wants to put me to death, and he's going to do so by not being a mason. He in his own mistaken understanding, thought that I contradict the Nevuah of Moshe Rabbeinu. Best is that I run away from him. Omar, Yeshayahu recited or pronounced the Shem HaMeforash. And he had a miracle, Ibla the Arzo. He was swallowed up into an Eitz Eretz. And Menashe says, Asyu Eliarza, bring me that tree which swallowed up Yeshaya and Asrua, and let's cut up the Eretz. Kimota, when the saw reached Lahadi Puma, the mouth of Yeshaya, Noch Nafshe, it cut the mouth of Yeshaya, and Yeshaya died. Why was Yeshaya punished in such a way that he would die? That cutting of his mouth, Mishum di Omer, he said about Klal Yisrael, Ubetoch Am Tmeis Vasayin Anochi Yoshe, that I dwell amongst a people of Tmeis Vasayin, meaning their lips are contaminated. And he said that on his own with Anani Tzivri Hashem, Donavua. He didn't say it as Tochacha. He spoke in such a negative way against Klal. Therefore, he was punished with fib in his mouth. The Gemara asks the following question: let's see how Taka Yeshaya would have, or how we could reconcile the apparent contradictions between Yeshaya's Nevuah and Moshe. And the Gemara says that when Yeshaya said "Va'eres Hashem," which is again a contradiction to Yorani Odom V'chai, we will interpret it Kedesanya Kol Neviim Nistaklu Biaspeklaria Sheinamir. They saw Hashem through mechitzos that separated them from the Shekhinah. So that's called Eina Me'ira. So they didn't have a clear perception. Moshe Rabbeinu Nistakel B'Aspaklaria Me'ira, and in his Aspaklaria, he understood clearly and certainly that Lo Ras Hashem, he couldn't see Hashem. And that which Yeshaya said, Dirshu Hashem Behimotz O, that's only referring to B'Tfilas Yachid. The Yachid has to find that special period of time, like Bein Kesel also, where Hashem will be accessible. But B'Tfilas Atzibur, then it's a whole different story. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu is always Matzui, as Moshe Rabbeinu claims, Kol Zman Shekorim Elov, if it's a Tfilas Tzibur. B'Yochin Emas, Omer of Nachman, Omer of Barvua, Elu Asar Yomim, Shebein Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, during the 10 days starting with Rosh Hashanah ending Yom Kippur, that's when Hashem is Matzui, even for the Yochid. And that's because the Gzar Din of a person is not sealed until Yom Kippur. So even a Yochid has the power to mevatel the Din. And Moshe says this Mispar Yomecha Amale, which implies that a HaKadosh Baruch Hu does not add to the life of a person. Whereas Yeshaya said, Posafti al Yomecha Chameshes Reishana, is Tanoihi. We have Machlokas Tanoim, how to interpret Moshe Rabbeinu's Nevuah, his statement, his proclamation of Es Mispar Yomecha Amale. This Sanyos Mispar Yomecha Amale. Here we turn to Daf Nun Omed Aleph, Elu Shnei Doros. Elu Shnei Doros, this Misfar Shonim that is designated for a person as a kitzvah from the time of his Leda is, according to Rabbi Akiva, that's the first opinion, Sacha Mashlim Lo. If he was Zocha, meaning he lived a good, righteous life, then he will actually live until that time period that was originally designated from the original kitzvah at the time of his later. But Lo Zacha, if on the other hand, he veers off the right path, he's deficient in his observance and his righteousness, then Lo Zacha Pochsin Lo. He will not live up to that age. Divrei Rabbi Akiva, and according to Rabbi Akiva, Mispar Yomecha Amali is to be interpreted that Hashem is mashlim the yomim shenikvetzu lo, niksevu lo, v'chachomam rizocha mosifin lo. If he's worthy of it, then he'll get extra time on this earth, like we saw by Chizkiah, or lo zocha pochsin lo. So that, according to this sheet of the Chachamim, when the pasuk says Mispar Yomecha Amali, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to be adding days, extra days, to the original psika as it was designated b'shas leid. Then the Brisa says, Amru lo, the Chacham asked the kasha to Rabbi Akiva, Hare hu omer, Hare legabi Chizkiah, when he was notel amavis, he was moving towards the end, and he prayed to Hashem. Yeshaya said to Chizkiah, in the name of God, Hosafti al yomecha chamesh esrei shana. We see that Hashem added to the original psika. And that's against Rabbi Akiva, because Rabbi Akiva says, Zachu, in the best case scenario, he'll reach the level that year that was originally designated for him. Omalahem, so Rabbi Akiva responds to the Chacham's argument. The pasuk says, V'hosafti l'cha. It doesn't mean that that Hashem says, I will add years above and beyond your original psicha as it was designated the kitzvah from the Leda, but rather what Hashem was thinking was, because he was guilty of not involving himself in marriage and perivarivya, of pchisa, of lowering the number of years, of reducing the number of years that was originally psika, that was originally designated for him. And then as a result of his tfilos to Hashem, mishalo hosifalo, they added, in order to get back to the original calculation, the original number of years that they had planned to subtract. Teda, I'll prove to you, says Rabbi Akiva, that they didn't add extra years to his life, but from the beginning he had those extra 15 years in the designation, the calculation, the kitzvah. Shrei Novi Omed Umisnabe, this is during the time of Yeravam, which was many years before Chizkiyo, and the Navi prophesied, Hine, Vein Nolad Lebeis David Yoshio Shmo. Now, at the time that Chizkiyo was ill, he took ill, Adain Lo Nolad, Menashe. Chizkiah Lo Nolad Lechizkiah Menashe Beno, from whom Yeshayahu would be born. So if the calculation of the years that Chizkiah lived after the Cholyo, Lo Nifsaku Lo Elagak Nosfu Lo Liachar Mikan. So we'll go over this one more time. Chizkiah is the father of Menashe. Menashe is the father of Yoshio. At the time that Chizkiah took ill, he hadn't yet gotten married, and he certainly didn't have a child by the name of Menashe, and certainly, therefore, it was way before the birth of Yeshayahu. Now, if you're going to tell, now here we get into the rules and the restrictions, limitations of Nevuah. This Nevuah also has its bounds. If the years that Chizkiah lived, that extra 15 years that was granted to him after his choli, were not included in the original calculation and kitzvah from the time of his later, but rather would be added later at the time of his illness, so how could the Navi prophesize regarding Ben Shenolad Yeshayahu Shmo back at the time of Yemei Ravam, which is many years before Chizkiah? This is a davar shelo katzuv, meaning the bounds and the restrictions of Nevuah is to prophesize about something which is a davar katzuv. It's already designated, not on something that will be added later on. So it must be that already Mikchila, the original Gzeira on Chizkiah was to live all those years that they added to him, meaning the 15 years. It was all part of the original calculation. Just that there was a threat to Chizkiah over his head that they would diminish the number of years of his life, and then through his tefillah, etc., they went back to the original kitzvah. And since the original kitzvah had those extra 15 years, during which time Chizkiah would have a child by the name of Menashe, who in turn would have a child by the name of Yoshio is therefore the Navi could predict it up front because it was already cut. For Rabbanon, the Rabbanon say that there's no proof from that Nevuah. Why? Niksiv, does it say that Yeshayahu will be born from Chizkiyahu? It just says Lebeis David Ksiv. In a generic sense, there will be a great king by the name of Yeshayahu who will be born to Beis David. And therefore, it's possible that Chizkiyahu would not be the father of Yoshio, or in a sense, the grandfather of Yoshio, but rather Yoshio would come from a different branch of the Beis David Mishpach. The Mishnah says Ishto Shemesa and Yevimta Shemesa. All this is extra. The Torah itself tells me that a man is not allowed to marry his wife's sister as long as his wife is alive. I'm Rav Yosef Kanshana Rebbe Mishnah Sheina Tzricha. Here, this Mishnah is not something that's necessary. The din that the Isra Achos Isha only applies b'chayeh when his wife is alive, but after she dies, he's allowed to marry her sister. That's explicit in the Torah. The Torah says b'chayeh, so that the Tana didn't have to teach this to me. Sometimes the Tana wants to spell things out and cover all the cases. However, Rashi points out that there is a chiddush in the Sefer of HaMishnah regarding Achos Yevimto. Hadron Alecha Perak HaCholetz. And now we begin Perak Rambam Gamliel. And this Perak Rambam Gamliel is a challenging Perak. We'll need a couple of introductions, which Amir Hashem will give in the next year. Thank you so much. And as always, a good night.